I never thought my life would come to this. Sleepless nights, endless hours staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks and shadows as if they held some hidden answer, but lately they feel like they do. There's something about the quiet of the night, the way it presses in around you when you're wide awake, something alive in the silence that starts to whisper when everyone else is fast asleep. My name's Ethan. I'm an artist. Well, I used to be. Now I'm just a guy with a loft full of half-finished canvases and no idea where his life is going. I moved to this place about a year ago, thinking the open space and high ceilings would help spark something, some kind of creativity. You know, that feeling you get when you're on the edge of inspiration, but you can't quite reach it? That's where I've been stuck for months. The ideas just aren't there. But then the insomnia started. At first, it was harmless. A few restless nights, tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable. It happens to everyone, right? But after a while, the nights became longer, the moments of sleep shorter, until I was getting maybe an hour or two, if I was lucky. I tried everything: sleeping pills, chamomile tea, counting sheep, you name it. I even started meditating, which is not really my thing, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Nothing worked. I didn't think much of it at first. People go through phases where they can't sleep, stress, anxiety, whatever. It happens. But when the hallucinations started, that's when I knew something was wrong. Not full-blown, out-of-control hallucinations, at least not at first. More like the kind of thing where you're not sure if you're awake or dreaming, shadows moving where they shouldn't, the edges of the room shifting when I blinked, faces forming in the texture of the walls, only to disappear the second I tried to focus on them. I was exhausted, sleep-deprived. That's all it was. Or so I kept telling myself. The night it really began, the night that would change everything, started like any other. I'd been up for hours, pacing the loft, staring out the window at the city below. My studio was on the top floor of an old converted warehouse. It had that industrial feel, exposed brick walls, high windows, and beams that creaked in the wind. Normally, I liked it. But at night, when the place was dark and the only sound was my own breath, it felt different, like it wasn't just my place anymore. I checked the time, 3:47 a.m. The numbers on my phone's screen glowed in the darkness, mocking me. I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes, and my body ached from exhaustion. I lay back down on the bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin, trying to force my eyes closed. But sleep didn't come. Of course it didn't. I rolled over, staring at the far wall. One of my half-finished canvases leaned against it, a mess of abstract colors and shapes. It was the closest thing I'd gotten to art in weeks, but even that felt forced. I didn't have the energy to finish it, didn't even care enough to try. I sighed and sat up, figuring I might as well get some work done since sleep was clearly out of the question. I shuffled over to my desk, rubbing my eyes as I switched on the small lamp beside my sketchbook. And that's when I saw it, the first painting. It was sitting on my easel, positioned perfectly in the center of the room, as if I'd placed it there to admire it. Only, I didn't remember painting it. It wasn't like the other half-done pieces I'd been working on lately. No, this was something else entirely. The canvas was larger, for one thing, and the image on it was sharp, precise. A forest scene, but not a peaceful one. The trees loomed, their branches gnarled and twisted, reaching out like skeletal fingers. The sky was dark, almost black, with slashes of deep red cutting through it like a wound. There was something off about the perspective, too. The trees seemed to bend in unnatural ways. leaning in towards something in the center of the frame. But what caught my eye, what sent a chill down my spine, was the figure standing among the trees, a silhouette, shrouded in shadow, facing away from the viewer. Its posture was rigid, unnatural. It felt like, if I stared long enough, it might turn around. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't remember painting this. I didn't remember starting this. I ran a hand over the surface of the canvas. The paint was dry. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, taking a step back. I had no memory of working on it. None. I would have remembered something like this. There was no way I could have painted something this detailed, this unsettling, without knowing. And yet, here it was, staring me in the face like a forgotten nightmare. I glanced at the clock again. 4:03 a.m. Had I blacked out? Sleepwalked? That didn't make any sense. Even if I'd been sleepwalking, how could I have painted something like this? This wasn't a random mess of lines or scribbles. It was deliberate, crafted. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, a dozen questions swirling around, none of them with answers. Finally, I just turned away from the painting, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. But when morning came, the unease didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. The painting was still there, still staring at me with that eerie, almost predatory silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, waiting for something. I decided to take a break, get out of the loft for a while, clear my head. The city was still waking up as I stepped outside, the early morning air cool against my skin. I wandered aimlessly, walking through streets I knew well, but that felt strangely distant. It was like I was floating, detached from everything. Sleep deprivation does that, I guess. Makes you feel like you're in a dream even when you're wide awake. I stopped at a cafe on the corner, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window watching people go by. Normal people. People who weren't haunted by strange, inexplicable paintings. I wanted to be one of them again. I wanted to sleep again. The coffee didn't help. It was strong, bitter, but it did nothing to chase away the fog that clung to my mind. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in thought, before finally heading back to the loft. When I got home, I couldn't bring myself to look at the painting. I avoided the easel entirely, heading straight to my desk to work on something else, anything else. But no matter how hard I tried, my eyes kept drifting back to that canvas, drawn to the shadowy figure standing in the forest. I should have destroyed it then. I should have burned it, ripped it apart, done something to get rid of it. But I didn't. I couldn't. It felt like the painting was waiting for me to understand it, to see something I hadn't yet seen. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again. The air in the loft felt thick, heavy, like the walls were closing in. I kept hearing sounds, soft creaks, the whisper of the wind outside, things that should have been easy to ignore. But they weren't. They felt wrong, like they weren't just sounds, like they were trying to tell me something. I tried to sleep, but it was useless. My mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about the painting, the figure in the forest, the trees leaning in. I kept wondering what it meant, why I had painted it. And then, just as I was on the edge of consciousness, I felt it. The sensation was subtle at first, a tingling at the base of my skull, a creeping awareness that something was in the room with me. I kept my eyes closed, too scared to open them. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, a side effect of the insomnia. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. Something was standing by the bed. I could feel its presence, heavy and cold, looming over me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had to fight the urge to bolt upright and run. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, praying it would leave, that whatever it was would disappear. But it didn't. The air grew colder, and I could hear it now. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like the rustle of fabric or the scrape of nails on wood. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The room was silent again, the air warm, almost stifling. I opened my eyes, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The loft looked the same as it always had, empty and still, but I knew something had changed. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know what was happening to me. I had to figure out why the painting had appeared, why I couldn't remember creating it, why I felt like I was being watched. I stood in front of the canvas again, staring at the figure in the forest. It looked different now, though I couldn't say why. The shadows seemed deeper, the colors more vivid, as if the painting had shifted overnight. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of it, thinking I might show it to someone, get their opinion. Maybe I was going crazy, maybe I wasn't. Either way, I needed answers. But as soon as I snapped the photo, the screen of my phone flickered, the image distorting for just a moment before returning to normal. I frowned, glancing at the painting, then back at my phone. That's when I saw it. In the photo, the figure in the forest had turned around. I dropped the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at the painting, eyes wide, but the figure hadn't moved. It was still facing away, just like before. But in the photo, it was staring right at me. I didn't leave the loft for the rest of the day. I couldn't. I was too afraid. Every time I looked at the painting, I half expected the figure to turn around, to move, to step out of the canvas and into the room. I knew I had to sleep. My body was begging for it, my mind unraveling at the seams. But the thought of closing my eyes, of letting my guard down, filled me with dread. That night, when I finally crawled into bed, I didn't even bother turning off the lights. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and whispers of the loft around me. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up, I was standing in front of the easel again. And there, on the canvas, was another painting, a figure staring out from a window, watching the city below. And behind the figure, reflected in the glass, was me.